Again, my name is Lindsey. I work with soybeans and small grains. And small grains used to be wheat, but now we've kind of morphed into malting barley world. I know a few of you are growing malting barley. How many? Anyone growing? So a handful. Anyone considering it? Other people just got stuck in your chair. I think malting barley is really interesting. It's new for me. I learned a lot this past year working with it. It's not wheat. I think that's the biggest take-home advantage. It's not wheat at all. But I'm going to talk about some of our research trials we just wrapped up this past year. First off, there are some malting barley resources here at Ohio State. This is my website here, stepupsoy.osu.edu. If you go to the Winter Malting Barley tab, everything I talk about today are summarized right here. You can click and download the PDFs. So that's a useful resource. A lot of malting barley is grown west, like way further west from here. So North Dakota, South Dakota, Idaho, Washington, Oregon. So it's unique to looking at this in Ohio because a lot of what goes on out there may or may not apply here. It's not the same growing conditions. What they have is spring malting barley. Here we're looking at winter malting barley. So there are a few resources here at OSU. Michigan State will have some as well, and I think there's some up in New York. So where are we at agronomically? This is new for me. I've been involved with malting barley research trials for 1 year. We're continuing again. This year we have trials planted. The two main areas I chose to focus on were seeding rate, because that's kind of a foundational practice, and then also spring nitrogen application rate. So that's what I'll focus on today. Our trials, we have them in 3 areas in Ohio, Wood County, Clark County, and Wayne County. So everything that I'm going to talk about today was on the cultivar Puffin. This is the cultivar that's being contracted by Origin Malts. So this is what most people are growing. So that's what I'm focusing on here. For our seeding rate trial, we had 5 seeding rates. 750,000 seeds per acre was our low rate, and then we went up to 2.5 million seeds per acre. And I left out the word million. It was not 2.5 seeds. It was 2.5 million. So I think I've presented this several times, and I have not noticed that yet. So what is the agronomic optimum seeding rate? So agronomic optimum is what I defined as the seeding rate that gives me the highest yield. And this is what we do for soybeans as well. But overall, there's a really poor relationship between yield and seeding rate. So this axis here, we're looking at yield versus seeding rate in million seeds per acre. Our 3 locations from top to bottom, Wood County, Clark County, and Wayne County. And there's not much of a response there to seeding rate. I did attempt to calculate the agronomic optimum, even though these lines were not statistically significant. It was somewhere between 1.6, 1.8 million seeds per acre. You could probably back off a little bit. Some of our trials were planted a little bit later, 11 to 20 days after the fly-free date, because Ohio, that's all I have to say. Sometimes we plant late because this is Ohio. But that was agronomic optimum, but not much of a response curve. My concern with these lower seeding rates is you can get pretty good yields with lower seeding rates because the barley plant will tiller more, and barley is great at tillering. But when you have these tillers, you can have uneven head emergence, and I think the issue there is going to be fungicide and vomitoxin because the stand at these lower rates was extremely uneven and when it was heading. So that's my concern there. But again, barley does have a great potential to tiller. These are trials in Clark County, April 13th at the top, 1 month later, May 17th at the bottom, 750,000 seeds per acre, 1.5 million seeds per acre, 2.5 million seeds per acre. You can see in April, doesn't look that great. But 1 month later, that plot, that's exactly the same plot from there to there, and you can see how it filled in. So it does fill in pretty remarkably, but you can also see this is all on the same date where I took these bottom pictures. The heading is just not as complete, and it's uneven. So that's the concern there. But barley will fill in amazingly. And one thing I've been trying to point out to people as I've been talking this winter as well is barley will look pretty bad in the spring. Those of you who have grown barley, would you agree? I think it looks bad in the spring. If you have wheat right next to it, wheat will start turning green sooner, and it'll start growing upright sooner, where barley seems to be a little bit behind. But it does have a great potential to tiller, fill in, and grow. The issue, too, with these lower seeding rates is weed control. We do a really, really good job to control weeds because we can. We backpack spray, we hoe, we do whatever we can to take weed control out of the equation in terms of yield. But with those thinner stands, weed control is important. The other thing with seeding rate to keep in mind is barley seed is really plump because you want the seeds to be plump for malting purposes, so the seed size is really large. So in our trial, Puffin had about 10,000 seeds per pound, which is large. Some people plant based on pounds per acre, and I hear a lot of people saying they'll plant 100 pounds per acre of barley. 100 pounds per acre at that seed size is 1 million seeds per acre. So you're on the lower side of that seeding rate. So this is something that we have in our barley guide. I think it's in the Ohio Agronomy guide as well. Make sure you check how many seeds you have per pound and adjust your rate to be appropriate, because that seed will be really large. Something else we're working on is evaluating stand in the spring. I said earlier, malting barley looks a little rough. This picture, the 7 rows here in the main part of the picture, that's malting barley. What you see to the side and the back, that's winter wheat. So that's the same field, same planter, same rate, same day. Everything was the same, just 2 different crops. We use wheat as our border. And you can see that wheat is starting to grow upright. It's green, it's lush, where the barley is still kind of, it's not growing upright and it's not quite as dark green. So if you have these 2 crops side by side, it can be a little worrisome, but that's just the way it looks like. So what we're trying to do right now, we have 1 year of small plot data. We're trying to work on assessing stand in the spring, and we've done this for winter wheat as well, with things like the polar vortex and wet weather and no snow cover. Stand can be impacted. So our recommendations are usually to count the number of stems or tillers. Does anyone do this? Nobody does this except for me. So you guys are all smarter than I am. But no one does this, and I always thought it was really, really silly for winter wheat when we tell people go out and count tillers, because nobody's going to do it. It's cold, it's wet, it's labor intensive. So what we're trying to do is a new method. There's a free smartphone application called Canopeo. Have you guys heard of Canopeo? So it's free. You can get it on Android and Apple, whatever their platform. iOS, I guess, is what it's called. It's free. It's from Oklahoma State University. And so what we've done with our small plot research, we count the number of stems per foot or row. We use this tool here. We call it a goalpost. It's 12 inches. We count the number of tillers. So that's the main stem. Well, we count the main stem and the tillers. And then this calculates something called fractional green canopy cover. So you just take your phone. I hold it at a height to get 3 rows of barley. I've done it for wheat too. I hold it at a height to get 3 rows, and this is at Feeks 5, and it tells you the percent green area, so it converts it to a black and white image. So these 3 rows of barley have about 45% canopy cover. So what we're trying to do is relate this canopy cover to yield to hopefully replace stem counts, because nobody does stem counts. And it works pretty well. This is 1 year of data. So ideally, how we would use this tool, we'd have a farmer go out in his field, take some pictures with Canopeo, get an average percent of fractional green canopy cover, and use this table to relate it back to yield. So we have 1 year of data. We're doing it again in small plots, and we're moving it on farm as well. So we'll be doing this to see how well it works on farm. Any questions about this or anything I've talked about? Yeah. Yeah, Feeks 5. We've done it at 5 and 6 for wheat, and I think 6 is a little bit too late. 5 seemed to work better. Yeah, this is on my website. So if you go to the seeding rate trial PDF on my website, the chart is there. And it's 1 year of data, so always take that with a grain of salt. It's 3 locations, and we'll continue to improve these models and this data as we go forward. This is barley data, but I have one for wheat as well. Mm-hmm. We have nothing in 15-inch. Yeah, it's all 7.5. But we have the capability of planting 15-inch rows, and that's something we're thinking about maybe this coming fall to do.
Just trying to understand this term, NDVI.
So NDVI is another tool we use. So have you guys heard of a green seeker sensor? It's a handheld sensor. We've done that as well. So we can relate NDVI, how green that our plots are, to yield as well. And NDVI works really well. So all 3 methods work pretty well. I didn't talk much about NDVI because it costs money. It's a tool you have to buy. And if FGCC and NDVI work equally well, I'd probably go with the free app.
Canopeo app is the right column.
Yeah, this is fractional green canopy cover, which is calculated from that app. Mm-hmm.
And that is almost like kind of see what that relationship is. You know, when you take this picture, it's going to have a big...
When you take the pictures, absolutely will play a big role in it, and also how many weeds you have, because this picks up both NDVI and fractional green canopy cover picks up green, and so if you have a weedy field, that's not going to work well either. Yeah, that's what we do for all of our plots. We pull out the weeds. So if you have a really weedy field, the stem counts is probably still the better method. Yes, the same day. Mm-hmm. So this was right before nitrogen application, which could play a role as well. But if you're doing a stand evaluation, hopefully it's before you apply nitrogen. Hopefully. So our other trial is a nitrogen rate trial. Again, we had the same 3 locations, Puff and Cultivar, and then everything had 20 pounds of nitrogen in the fall, and then we had 4 spring nitrogen rates, 0 to 120 pounds of nitrogen per acre. Here I do have a response curve. So here we're looking at our 3 locations again, Wood County, Clark County, Wayne County, yield versus our spring nitrogen application rate. And there is a response curve. Agronomically speaking, our highest yield was close to 120 pounds in Wood County, and then 100 pounds at the other 2 locations. This is agronomic optimum, not economic optimum. That rate's probably a little bit lower. And the other thing that's really important to keep in mind with barley is protein. You want low protein. So protein should be 9.5 to 12.5% on a dry weight basis. The issue with nitrogen is that yield responds quadratically. So we get a yield increase to nitrogen, and then it plateaus. Protein is the opposite. It's linear. So as we increase our nitrogen application rate, protein increases linearly. So this is considered luxury consumption of nitrogen. So the plant doesn't really need nitrogen to increase yield. It just takes it up, and then your protein will go up, which is not ideal. This red line is at 12.5%. So this is the kind of the threshold you want to be under. At the Wood County location here, we never went over that threshold. So that's really cool. We could apply a lot of nitrogen and not go over that. I don't know what next year will bring. We'll see. The other 2 locations, we did go over that threshold of 12.5%. At the Wayne County location, that's the green triangles, that was at about 80 pounds of nitrogen. And then at the western location, it was even lower. It was about 60 pounds of nitrogen when we went over that threshold. So there's this linear increase. This is really common. I've looked at the data from out west. They have the same linear trends as what we see. But there's an environmental effect as well, where not all locations increase protein at the same level. So it's good to back off of your nitrogen rate. Based on this data, I'd probably be somewhere in the 60 to 80 pounds in the spring. And even 60 to 80 pounds we'll still get you a pretty decent yield. That's up here. So, any questions about nitrogen?
So, can you go to the next slide? So you got at 60 pounds, you passed the protein content, but you only got what kind of yield out of that 60 pounds?
So, So 60 pounds. That was at the western location. That's the red squares. At the western location, when I applied 60 pounds, I got about, it's hard to eyeball, maybe 70, high 70s, low 80s, which is decent. But what's also interesting, too, with no nitrogen at the northwest location, I get 80 bushels. But the same concern with those low rates is the same as what you have for low seeding rates. When you have these low rates of nitrogen, 0, 40 pounds, the heading is really uneven, and the stand's really not uniform. And we haven't analyzed for vomitoxin yet, but my gut feeling says these lower rates where the heading was really uneven, even though the yields weren't terrible, I think vomitoxin could be an issue. So
if you end up below or above the protein, do they discount it or they don't take it?
So I wouldn't worry about being below, because I don't think I've seen anything really less than 9.5. So low I don't think is a big concern. If you go over, there is a contract with Origin Malts, and I haven't seen it, but there are financial considerations to not going over 12.5.
It's really cheap. The price is bad.
Half three levels. We got a $7 tier for putting their top criteria, and they've got a $6 for protein and vegetable feed grade.
So this is really important.
It's under lower, are you getting more nitrogen out of mineralization down further down? That's about soil.
Yeah, so I think there's looking at other states as well. So the soil plays a factor. If you have mineralization, that's something that's more nitrogen that's being added to that plays a role. The other thing that plays a role in protein is rainfall. So if you are under drought conditions, that barley seed will be smaller, and we have the smaller seed, it's not as plump, the protein will go up. So there are environmental, soil, and weather factors that go into this as well.
It's like protein.
Say that again?
Like a protein yield per acre is like, as opposed to a bushel, but it's slightly bigger.
Right. Yep. Any other questions or comments about that? And all of this is online as well. And we're going to repeat it again this next year. So I guess our next steps, so we've looked a little bit at pre-harvest sprout. We didn't have any problems with pre-harvest sprout. I don't think my undergrad thought she was doing it wrong because she didn't count any seeds that had sprouting, which is good. But like wheat, timely harvest is important. We had pretty good quality because we had timely harvest. If your grain dries down and it gets re-wetted, that's going to be big problems. It's big problems for wheat, and I think you guys probably remember that. I don't know, it was 2015. Yeah, it's really big problems if your barley gets re-wetted too, because you don't want to have any pre-harvest sprout. Fusarium damaged kernels, we didn't really see much problem with that this past year. We haven't measured DON yet. We're still working on that. Our germination, you want germination to be over 95% because the malting process involves germinating that grain. So you want germination to be high. Most of our germination was above that 95%, so that wasn't a huge concern. And then plumpness is really important. You want them to be plump seeds. So any questions or comments?
Did you apply fungicide?
We did not apply any insecticide. We did apply fungicide. And the fungicide, we just applied it once. We didn't have any fungicide treatments. We did it probably slightly too early. Barley is tricky because it heads extremely, extremely fast. And so I was at our plots in Clark County, and there was just one on coming out of like a handful of plants. In like 24 hours, that thing was almost headed. Like it just, when it starts going, barley goes really, really, really fast. So keep an eye on that. And with wheat, it'll flower, it'll head, and then it'll flower. Barley won't completely head and then flower. It'll flower before it heads. So that's another tricky. And so the timing thing is something Pierce is working on. So Pierce will have some recommendations, but I think they'll be slightly different than they are for wheat just because the flowering timing is differently. And it goes extremely fast, so keep an eye on it. Any other questions? If not, here's my contact information, and here's my website again. I guess the other thing that we're looking at is double crop soybeans. I think there's a really big potential for double crop soybeans after this crop. This is Northwest Ohio. We harvested barley on June 21st. Unfortunately, we did not have a double crop there because the other key is making sure you apply the right herbicides to allow double crop soybeans. That's the other caveat. But we did have double crop soybeans in Worcester and Western. And Western's traditional, we can do double crops there. Worcester is not a place where we would normally do double crops, and I think we yielded about 45 to 50 bushels per acre, which is really phenomenal, I think, for northern Ohio. So I think we're going to watch the herbicide program closer this year, and we'll have a site in Wood County. But I think there is a pretty big potential there for double crop soybeans as well.
The other thing, if you're going to plant barley, you're planting back on some of your bean chemicals that are different than
Yes. Yeah, you have to watch your herbicide programs in the barley and the soybean crop before both. Yes. Yes, pay attention to herbicides. And I heard, too, there was a conference call last night. I don't know if you were on the call, but there was a conference call last night, and a lot of the growers were saying they felt barley was more sensitive to soybean herbicides than wheat is. And I don't know if you've seen that or feel that, but yep, yeah, and there is a herbicide chart too of recommended herbicides because it is sensitive to some. Planting date. So I don't know if it's more sensitive to wheat or not, but I'll tell you it's important. Planting date is important, and planting early is important. Not before the fly free. I know, you're like the Andorrans. Andorrans always scolds me if I say plant soybeans early, because it's always 50 degrees, not early, but you're right. Not before the Hessian fly free date.